attention to problem 35, and this is on page 383. And so hopefully you have opened the file that is in your book on the portal for problem 35. Let's read it together. A crew company has identified 5 industry segments: plastics, metals, lumber, paper, and finance. You remember that the first step is to identify the operating segments. They have done that for you. So our job is to determine which ones of those are reportable segments, which is step 2. There are 3 tests, and it says here, it appropriately consolidated each of these segments in producing the annual financial statements, and information about each segment is as follows. And they give the sales, the intersegment transfers. Intersegment transfers are sales from one segment to another segment. Then interest income from outside parties, that is revenue, that does count. Interest income from intersegment loans, that also counts. And then operating expenses, interest expense, yes, that does count. Then the next 3 lines are assets for the asset test: tangible assets, intangible assets, and intersegment loans, which is payable or receivable from the other. And you notice it's the finance segment that has a receivable from the other 4. That is an asset for the asset test for the finance segment. So the first is the revenue test, and they took the first 4 lines. So for plastics, you add 66.94 plus 148 plus 0 is 68.42. And so that is right here, 68.42. For the metals, same thing. There's one more. 23.54 plus 173 plus 34 plus 0. And you do that for each of them, but notice for finance, it's 42 plus 201. So it's the first 4 lines of the given information is this revenues. And then we total that. And really all you need to do is get any that if you put your decimal if you move your decimal one place so that you have $1,108.80, anything above that number or above would be 10%. And so these 2 are reportable. I don't think you need this percentage column, as you have a benchmark, and your benchmark here is $1,108.80. Those 2 become reportable, plastics and metals. For the profit and loss test, you use those same numbers. You'll see that you do the same numbers. So I suggest one schedule for both of these tests. This would be the first column, and then you would so all you really need is this, and you could add your total right here. You could do your revenues test there and do your profit and loss test here. And so they took the expenses that are given in the book, and so yes, it's the 42.14 for plastics plus the 76. So those 2 lines equals this number. Now, the one thing to remember is that we're going to use absolute value for profit and loss. 68.42 minus 42.90 is 25.52, profit. But when we get down to 870 for lumber minus 11.32, it's a loss. We don't want to just put negative 262 there, because that would give us a bigger number, a smaller number here, and make more operating segments reportable. We don't want that. We want the biggest number we can get for our benchmark. And so we put the ones with profits in one column, the ones with losses in the other column. And then we take 10% of whichever is bigger. In this case, 10% is 343. This is the bigger number. We're trying to limit the number of reportable segments, not add to the number. And so we want the biggest benchmark we can get, 343. But then we use absolute value. So yes, this is reportable. Yes, this is reportable. If this one was 400 loss, it would also be reportable, because it would be a loss bigger than 343. So it's absolute value, not just, we don't do anything with this number, only with the 3430 times 10%. And so again, just those 2 are reportable. Finally, the asset test, and we use all of those columns: tangible, intangible, and intersegment. So for your finance, 885, is the 179 plus the 706. And that makes the finance section reportable, you see. So they do the tangible and intangible and intersegment, and the total is 7,430, which makes our benchmark 743. That one, that one, that one, and that one. So paper and finance now are reportable as well. In these two, we only had 2 reportable segments, but it only takes 1 test to make it reportable. And so to finish this, we would say plastics, metals, paper, and finance are all 4 reportable. Then we would go and make sure that the external sales, which is the top line, sales to outside parties, 6,694 plus 2,354 plus 711 plus 422 plus 0. We would add those together, multiply by 75%, and make sure that the plastics, the metals, the paper, and the finance do equal at least 75% of that total. And that is problem 35.